Hello,
Hello.
and welcome to Planet Marzipan, the Fish and Marillion podcast. I'm Meza, and here's my mate.
Craig Houston.
Hello, and welcome to Planet Marzipan. I am Meza, I'm here with my friend,
Craig.
and we have another Planet Marzipan Meets episode this week for you. And this week, Planet Marzipan meets Fraser Marshall. Welcome, Fraser.
Thank you. Hello.
It's good to see you. Thank you for giving us your time today. Um, so Fraser is part of the Web UK and has been for a long time now. For how many years is that?
I think it was 2002-ish.
Wow. Okay, it's a long
Yeah,
time. Um,
You get less for murder now.
yeah, you
I'm
definitely
gonna
do.
I'm gonna ask you shortly about what being part of the Web UK entails, and that's quite a long list, I understand. But we'll come on to that in a minute. I've already asked you this question on the pod because you were good enough to guest with us a few weeks back. But can you tell us briefly how you first heard about Marillion and first got into Marillion's music?
Yeah, I can. I mean, I won't. I'll try and keep it a little brief because I did discuss it on a previous episode. Essentially, me and a bunch of my mates used to meet up on a Friday night round at our friend Jim's house, and we'd listen to sort of the latest Bon Jovi album or whatever it was, and drink Fosters and get drunk on 3 cans of beer, kind of thing, you know. And just one evening, he put on Clutching at Straws, and I was quite drunk, and I just remember listening to it and going, "Oh, what is this?" You know, and genuinely having that sort of like, "Oh, this." Just knew from the opening, tinkly opening to Hotel Hobbies, going, "Oh, this is going to be amazing." And then the guitar comes in, and you're like, so I went out and bought that pretty much the next day, and I had everything. Excuse me, I had pretty much everything that was available within, 3 months to whatever. And there was still stuff you could go and get some of the 12 inches. I remember buying a Garden Party and He Knows You Know and the Market Square Heroes picture disc. Even I found in my local record shop, which was a chart shop, so I think it did have probably a better selection than many. But yeah, so I got everything, and then pretty much about 3 months after that, Fish left. So that was a sort of a bit of an odd thing going,
Yeah.
I've just decided this is my new favorite band. So that was quite traumatic. But as I think I said last time, I think in a way that probably helped when it came for Steve Hogarth coming along, that I was a little bit perhaps open-minded about it. That perhaps I wouldn't have been if I'd been a fan for years and years and years. And the other bit of the story, which I told last time, was I was aware of them, particularly around Misplaced. And I remember seeing the video to Kaylee on Top of the Pops, and you got Fish trailing his hand along the railings, and he's wearing a Mac. And I always found it a bit seedy. He just looked like a bit of a, I don't know. And he doesn't actually. I've watched it since, and it's not nearly as bad as my brain thought it was at the time. But I just had this sort of image of, oh, I'm not quite sure about this. I remember when Lavender came out, and I really liked that. I thought that was much better. I don't remember hearing Heart of Lothian. I can't remember whether that ever got played on Top of the Pops. I suspect maybe it didn't. So they were around. I was vaguely aware of it and everything, but yeah, it wasn't until that night at Jim's house that it sort of became a big thing, and it blossomed into something pretty big pretty quickly.
And then you first saw them on the Season's End tour, is that right?
I saw them at the Season's End tour. It was in the Astoria,
Oh yeah.
the No Longer With Us
No.
Astoria, and yeah, it was quite weird actually. I don't know whether I was just being a real fanboy or something dreadful, but I remember getting quite faint, or maybe it was just very hot in the crowd or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, I had a moment where I had to go outside, and I was sort of leaning against a wall, sort of to stop myself falling over. Might have been a little bit drunk as well. That's also a possibility. But I actually missed a couple of songs, which obviously was extremely irritating and everything. But I was really impressed. It was a fantastic gig. loads of energy. And I mean, I know that H always talks about the reaction he got when they were in Paris.
Yeah,
But the reaction in the Astoria was pretty amazing as well, and you could tell that the people were really open to the idea of this new guy, and he absolutely pulled it off. He was all over the stage, in those days, wasn't he? He was like
yeah.
you know,
Health and safety. What's that? Yeah.
yeah, exactly,
I
exactly.
mean,
So it
there's
was a
a big
great gig.
old capacity once at the Astoria. We went for a few times. I seem to remember when it was standing, it was a fair old size.
Yeah, I can't. I wouldn't know what it was exactly, but
No, no.
I mean, judging by the sorts of levels of bands that were playing there, I mean, I remember seeing Smashing Pumpkins there and things like that. So it was fairly big bands that
Yeah,
would,
yeah.
that would play it. And then there was an upstairs bit as well, which you could overlook
It
the
was it
stage
Yeah,
was
it had
from.
it was seated with tables and things as
Yeah,
it
such,
had
if
exactly.
I
booths. It
remember
had
That's it.
rightly.
booths,
Yeah,
didn't it? It had booths
yeah. I really
along the way.
liked it. I thought it was a great venue. It was a shame it got knocked down, but there you go. We got the Elizabeth line eventually out of it, so
Yes, it
that's
Tottenham Court
definitely,
Tube Station expansion.
yeah.
Okay, well, that's how you first got into the band, and you've been with the Web UK for a long, long time,
Mm.
as we've already discussed. So, how did you first get involved with that?
So I think really you'd have to go back to it was the Opium Den mailing list. So probably most people will remember this, but there was the
Yeah.
Freaks mailing list, which was the original online mailing list for Marillion fans, and then the Opium Den was split off from that by Hippie Dave Cooper, and
Yeah,
it was really an attempt to sort of have a safe space for H fans where they could be enthusiastic about the H era of the band without getting opprobrium from the more diehard end of the fish, people who just weren't prepared. There were people who I don't like anything they've done since Fish left, and I'm just going to be rude and stuff. And equally there's some the other way as well. But the Opium Den was an attempt to have that sort of safe space. So I was on that, and I remember talking nonsense and getting involved in discussions on that. And then it was the turn of the 2H gigs at Dingwalls, where they did Live Body, Live
Body
Spirit.
Spirit. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So that day, or no, it wasn't that. The day of the first gig, I got my first and only tattoo, which my brother paid for. And it was a sort of belated 30th birthday present. And I'd sort of mentioned it and said, "Oh, I'm getting this tattoo today," kind of thing. And Lucy said, "Oh, well, come and say hello when you get to the," and then I said, "I'm coming down to the venue," and so ended up going down the venue, and I met a whole bunch of people who I'm still delighted to be friends with to this day, and some of those people were involved in the Web UK. So very quickly, I met George. I met Mark and Tracy Donald, who many of your listeners will
yeah,
probably know.
yeah.
Yeah.
I met Simon and Vicky, who were with the Web at that time. James Fishwick, I think, was there, and Lucy, obviously, I met in the flesh for the first time, and so there was a sort of big hello, and it was a really nice thing, and we became sort of quite close after that, and ended up going to parties and things together and stuff. So I kind of was in that circle,
Yeah.
and then when they did the first Marillion convention at the at Pontlitz, in the delights of that very first holiday camp, I can still feel the bed sticking to my legs.
Yeah, we do need to do an episode around that, don't we?
Oh,
We've promised the Cakey Boy reunion for that one.
Yeah, yeah,
you would be the ideal people to talk through that. It was an auspicious thing in many ways. It
it
was.
was.
It was such a sort of weird and grim thing. Now I'm trying to remember. Actually, is my memory playing tricks? Was it there that had the Highwayman, or was that Butlins?
I think that was
That was
Butland's.
Was that
Butlin.
Butlins?
Yeah,
Okay, so
Butlins,
that
yeah.
means that
that's where the
Pontins.
quiz came in, wasn't
So
it? That?
Butlins didn't have the quiz. Sorry, Pontins didn't have the quiz.
No, no.
But the following year, so 2003, that must have been 2003. So then they did have the quiz at the Highwayman,
Yes.
and I got involved in writing some of that. And I have told this story before, and I grossly misremembered. I was saying to you before we started recording, I have terrible problems with memory, and I gave a version of the story where I took far too much credit for what had been done. So I want to be very, very clear on the limits of how much I'd done. But I certainly wrote, I think, one of the rounds or something like that, and I got involved in presenting that, and that was with the Web UK there. And I think that led to me being invited to participate. So I said earlier, 2002, it can't have been 2002 because it was definitely after I'd done the quiz at the 2003 convention.
Right. But it's over 20 years.
It's over 20 years, yeah. It's a long old time, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And so that was your initial involvement.
Yep.
Let's go right up to date. What do you currently do for the Web UK?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think, I try to come up with ideas for articles. So you quite often will see my name on things, and I like to think that I come up with things that are perhaps a little bit out of the ordinary, not quite your straight tours or um, I try to think outside the album tour cycle. That's got to be in there, and that's really
Yeah.
important and everything. But I like to sort of go, well, what else can we do? So I've done quite a number of fan stories over the years, and just tried to find things that are a bit more interesting. I tracked down Josie Ayres, for example, and
Yeah.
wrote about her, the girl from the Brave film, and that was quite an interesting one. It was quite dark, actually. She had a hell of a life, poor girl.
Really?
It was quite bleak. I mean, she was not a million miles away from the girl in the film.
Oh, God.
So yeah, it was all quite dark. And I've done a number of sort of stories about sort of mad things, like the guy who cycled to Port Zealand one year from London,
Yeah.
and all sorts of other things. I've interviewed Marco from Marco's Marillion Museum. I even interviewed myself once about something that you will probably talk to me about my website in a little bit.
Oh, okay.
So, I think I try and do that sort of thing. I'm generally the person who's responsible for writing the intro piece, which is a real difficult thing to do. Try and come up with
Something
what you
different
hope
every
is
time.
something interesting, and will sort of at least give a bit of contextualization to what they're about to read and everything. I think the thing about the web these days is, and this is true probably going back most of the time I've actually been in the web. I think when I first came in, obviously the internet was still relatively new. I mean, we know that Marillion did Marillion.com and used the card in the thing as a way to collect email addresses, and we know obviously that about the self-financing of Anarachnophobia, which I was on your podcast to talk about that previously. And so the web the internet has always been very important to Marillion, but I still think at the point that I first joined, it hadn't quite got to, hadn't fully become embraced by everybody, and all the rest of it. So the web was still very important as a news service for the fan base. And what has happened increasingly is that as everything has moved online and a lot of sort of fan generated material, like prog forums or whatever it is, have provided sort of very good mechanisms for interviews and all this kind of stuff. And you can't keep up with that. There's just no way. As a printed magazine, you are not you cannot compete with that. You're not telling them something first. Marillion is going to send you an email telling you, "Hey, we're doing this new thing. Do you want to be a part of it, or do you want to know about it, or do you want to buy this, or whatever it happens to be?" That's just the nature of the world. So we've had to adapt, and it has been. I think, as the band have slowed down in terms of, how quickly they can turn an album around, it has become quite challenging at times to sort of think, well, what on earth are we going to put into this magazine? And, so we sort of all get together. We have a little Facebook group for the team. And normally Anne Bond, who I know you've had on previously, on a Meet
I've
Anne
had our own
Bond
episode, yeah.
Yep. So Anne will normally be the one to kickstart the conversation and say, we need to get the contents of a next magazine. Has anybody got any ideas? Does anybody want to do anything? has Lucy, if Lucy has said, "Oh, I want you to do something," because quite often she'll say, "I want you to do this, that, and the other," then she'll throw that out there and she'll find somebody who wants to do it. Obviously, Mezzy, you've been invited to do a few reviews in the recent past,
Yep,
and very
yep.
good they've been too as well. I might
Thank you
say.
very much.
So sometimes it's about going who in the fan base is an appropriate person to do this. I can think of like when they've been doing things like Cruise to the Edge. Who's on that cruise? Who can
Yeah.
write something that's going to be, an engaging read and all that kind of stuff. So I think we have had to change, and it's meant that perhaps the long form, the more in depth form of interview and an article has become more to the fore, rather than perhaps the snappier pieces that maybe were the thing in the old days.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely been. I mean, that is quite challenging.
Is it 2 episodes a year? 2 episodes. Look at me, podcast mode. 2 magazines a year now.
It's 2 magazines a year now. Yeah, I mean that again was driven by the fact that it was really difficult to pull sort of enough content together to get out 3 magazines. If they were having a year where they were recording, there's really not a lot happening. So you're relying on Rothers going out and doing a gig, or Pete going out and doing a transatlantic album, or
Well, the former happens quite a lot, doesn't it?
it does. It does.
Yeah.
But you take my point. It's
Yeah.
H doing his Christmas show or whatever it might be. And I think back to when they were doing the web in the sort of the 90s, which is when I think it sort of, you could see the early webs, which were very fan based, were really good. And then there was a step up in quality, I think, when Simon and Vicky and Hippie Dave, Rob and Alexis Crossland, Andy Rother and people like that, they were running the Web UK, and they moved to the sort of the A3 web magazines, and they were able to do a lot more in depth, and there was some really good stuff came out of that era. With the magazines, then but at the time it went to eventually, I think it was Two Twisting Tales,
Yes.
the A4
The mini
newsletter.
ones, yeah, newsletters.
And then was it 4 magazines a year on top
I
of
think it
that?
was initially, yeah.
They were a lot thinner, obviously, than now. And so to go back to your original point about our magazine, so we have come down from 3 to 2, but actually the number of pages in them is still actually the same overall.
Yeah, it's a substantial read. It really is. It's good.
It is a substantial read.
Right.
I was I was there when, who must it have been? Can't remember who it was who dropped off and sort of stopped being responsible for the magazine. But I was the one, I think, maybe I'm falsely taking credit again, who suggested the A4. Certainly I was in favor of the A4 format. And I remember picking, there was a fantastic picture of H leaping in the air, one which we've seen a number of times since, but you can picture the kind of thing. And I just went, that's the cover. That's a wraparound cover. And it was a great cover, and it got really good kudos. Jim Sanders had produced the new logo for us, and that looked terrific. And then we got lots of comments saying that the design work inside wasn't quite as good, and that was very squarely on my shoulders. So very rapidly, Jim came in and took over that job and was magnificent at it as a professional.
Yeah.
And then we had Francis after that came in and designed for a long time, and now we've got Steph, who's designing the magazines. They've all been magnificent, all slightly different in their own way. But yeah, I think the A4 magazine has been really good for showing off those really good pictures, and actually, getting just a lot of words into the magazine as well. It's as you say, it is a really chunky read.
And the membership is fairly static, isn't it? I think,
as I understand it. So the Web UK is somewhat unusual in that, unlike the other webs, we sort of have much more of a direct relationship with the band. So Lucy will speak to us directly on our Facebook group. She is a member, and knows what's happening at any point. And because it's paid for directly by the band out of the memberships, but it's the band's sort of direct bank account that's used to pay for these things. They have much more quality control over what we put in, and it does mean there are restrictions on what we are able to do. We wouldn't be able to do probably too much about Fish era stuff, for example, because they want to keep the focus on the modern band, and that's fine. It's their money; they are entitled to do that. But it does mean that what we can do is slightly different from what the other webs can do.
Yeah. So Fraser, you did help present that very first quiz back in 2003, was it? I think we were talking
Yeah.
about. You still help present the Port Zealand quiz.
Yes.
I'm involved in it, but I'm going to ask you questions as though I don't know what happens. So
well, we first had our sample. We didn't do the 2003 quiz because the pub was so absolutely heaving.
we arrived at the Highwayman too late, and there were no chairs.
Yes.
So we didn't. It was oversubscribed, which
and then we did the 2005 quiz, and then it all went horribly wrong.
Well, we won it by half a point, I think. Yeah. But you're still presenting now with Darren and myself and a huge team of people that set the quiz. Would you be prepared to talk a little bit about how the quiz comes together?
Yeah, very happy to. I mean, it is a real labor of love to put the quiz together. It really is, and it does take, as you say, it's a huge team. I mean, how many people is it? It's probably
I think there's about a dozen.
About a dozen people chipping in, and so somebody will come up with, somebody will say, oh well, they're doing this album next year, so we need to do a round about that, and then somebody will say, well, how about an album like this? There's a few things that have been sort of favorites over the years, like the music clips, but even that's evolved. We started off doing it backwards, and now we do variations on it, and we've done wibbly wobbly versions of it, and all sorts of things of that nature.
Bodily function versions.
Bodily functions, yes.
Yeah.
On stage with the band, that was Mark Kennedy, wasn't it?
It was
the farts version together.
That was when we first presented the quiz.
Yeah. And that was very, very funny. It really was absolutely hilarious. Although I'm not sure the entire audience quite got it.
Yeah, but, the band loved it.
Most of us thought it was hilarious. But to go back to the process, we've got a Facebook group, and we have a big spreadsheet, and people will throw in their questions, and then everyone else will eventually get round to reading them. And there's a few people who you can pretty much guarantee to go, oh no, that's not quite right, and so eventually it goes through the correcting of any errors that have been made, or oh, that's right, but I think you need to also add in this,
clarify this. So
exactly. Yeah. And then we vote on them. So we'll just collect, if we've got 15 potential questions, we'll vote on them. Then often it's still, after that, we're still tinkering with the wording to try and come up with something that's concise. Because one of the things you've got to take into account, of course, is that you're dealing with a good portion of that PZ audience is not English speaking by their first language. Now, I know that most Europeans are put us to shame with their amazing grasp of English. But nevertheless, once you get into sort of quirky questions about something quite nerdy, you've got to be really careful how you phrase it. And there have been errors or things that haven't worked and haven't come across how they were intended to, and things like that from time to time. So we work really hard to try and make sure that we got a proper balance. I always think that you should aim for something like 60% of the questions 80% or 90% of people should be able to get. You want most people to be able to get 50, 60% on every round. Then you want sort of 3 hard ones, and you want 1 real stinker that's going to separate, to use a sexist phrase, the men from the boys. The real nerds. This isn't a better analogy, I think, but it's less sexist. The nerds from the dilettantes, and that, to me, I think it's really important to try and get that balance, because if you don't, the people who are just there to enjoy the quiz and have a laugh and drink a few beers and fill the time, they're going to get bored if it's really, really navel gazing. What's the I don't know, what's the catalogue number of a particular release or something? Who cares? It's not interesting. It's not fun. You want it to be that you either know the answer, or when somebody says what the answer is, you go, oh, of course it is.
Yeah.
That's where the enjoyment comes from.
Yeah, we had 99.9% retention throughout when we did it. We were very lucky that way on.
To be fair, the recent quizzes have been, most people have stayed with it.
Yeah,
We
I
try,
mean
as
it's a
Fraser
long
says,
old quiz
we
these
try
days.
and bring an element of humour into it, and hope that sort of translates to the different nationalities in the
Yeah,
room.
yeah,
And
I've come up with various.
Barnsley's come up with the AI round for last time,
Which
which
would be
is
Mm,
brilliant.
another different angle. But yeah,
absolutely.
work has already begun for 2025. The spreadsheet's up and running, and the Facebook group is alive as we speak, I think, isn't it? So
Yeah, I'm not sure I've contributed anything much. I think I made a couple of comments, but yeah. So it's in a work in progress for the next year, and I guess gives this is the last one at PZ, we're going to have to really push the boat out and make it absolutely fantastic. And yes, I've got a few ideas actually that I ought to put on the list, and
yeah,
maybe we can talk about those things. But yeah, it's a really fun thing to do. I mean, it's very rewarding to to give that many people a fun afternoon. Actually, there is a sense of achievement from it. Um, Actually, what often happens at the quiz at PZ is that I get called away because Stephanie has. I'm sort of Steph and Stephanie's bitch whilst they're at PZ. So if they want anything, I'm their gopher basically. And often it's the photographing, it's the photography session in the main market dome, and I need to go and sort of do a bit of marshalling of people there. So quite often I miss a portion of the quiz, which is a shame because I really
yes,
enjoy it.
that portion being the end, where Guy Vickers
Unfortunately,
usually finds a problem with one of the questions. Hello, Guy, if you're listening.
Just one of the
We do love
questions.
you. We do love you.
it
Yes.
is true. It does happen, and
Yeah.
we know it's very frustrating. But honestly, if people knew how hard we tried to get those things right,
Yeah.
and we really do want it to be, but it wouldn't be a pub quiz, right? If there wasn't a question that somebody debated, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, but
And
yeah, it's good fun.
as you say, it's a huge team, and there's also a big team of people marking on the day as well. I
Huge
think
team. Yeah,
about
yeah,
10 or 12
absolutely,
people marking, so it's a
absolutely.
real team effort, and we enjoy it. I know Darren, when we get Darren on the pod, he has agreed to
Mm,
come on. I'm sure we'll talk about it again then. But if you're at PZ, please come and take part. It's
absolutely.
it's free. Um, you've had a website for a number of years about the origins of the lyrics,
Mm,
the songs. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I certainly can. Yeah, since '97. Just
The
so
dawn of the internet.
ridiculously.
Wow.
Except, well, yeah. I mean, it's so ridiculously long. And actually, when it first started, I didn't even know how to do any coding, and I had to rely on a Dutch chap who ran the discography for the band, Bart, and he did it. Sorry, Bert, and he would what's his name? Bert the Ter Steeg, the
Okay.
chap's name. I don't think he's around these days. I haven't seen him online. I don't think the discography was being updated for quite some time. But he put my first efforts into HTML. Yeah, essentially what happened was this was on the Opium Den, and there was a conversation, or it might have been Freaks. There was a conversation about Forgotten Sons, and somebody who I think I'm going to say French, but I could be wrong on that. Somebody posted, I think the song's about this. And they posted this very long and detailed explanation, and they'd sort of really gone to town on putting this explanation of what they thought the song was about. And I remember reading it and going, well, yeah, no, you've not got that. And I realized that there's all this stuff in the lyrics that is so peculiarly British that unless somebody's sort of explained it to you, you might not sort of really get what it's digging at. And you can think like words like talking about a Saracen's hull. You're like, what on earth is that? A Saracen, it's an archer from the days of Robin Hood and the Crusades, and it wouldn't necessarily come across what that meant in that context. So I went down the pub with my best mate, and we sat in this place just off Tottenham Court Road, and we had a copy of Brewer's Phrase and Fable and a dictionary, and we went through. I can't remember, was it the Fish era albums, and sort of did a rough first sort of what's a phrase and what does it mean, and what would sort of try to thrash out, and then I gradually sort of put it together and sent it over to Bert, who uploaded those original versions. And it's sort of gone on from there. I mean, that first version was me and Matt in a pub, but since then it's really relied on contributions from other people. And I've tried to be really fastidious about crediting people for their contributions. Um, and it's just sort of I use this in the introduction. I say it's like taking a butterfly of a poem and pinning it to a board, and when you finish, you got a dead butterfly. I think there is a real danger, and H has said this as well. If you analyze these things to death,
Yeah,
you
too
take all
much.
the beauty out of them. And
Yeah.
I absolutely think that if you take something from a song, that is right, and nobody should take that away from you. I remember breaking down in tears at the last convention because my father hadn't long died at that point, and it just had a new resonance. There was a lyric that I'd heard lots of times before, and just had a new resonance, and it wasn't. It wasn't what you think. It wasn't, like Estonia or something like that. And it was just something that hit in a different way. And those things have to be valid.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons that Marillion have always been, since I've first heard them at Jim's party, why they've always been my favorite band was just that fact that you could pull bits out of it and go, oh, that line, she's got to carry on with her life, but you've got to carry on with yours. Oh, I know who that's about. you know.
Yeah.
And so many of us, I think, have that ability to relate these things, whether it's H, whether it's fish, to different aspects of our lives and connect them and go, yes, this resonates. And so I would never ever want to be saying to people that's not what these songs are about. But equally, I think there are things that crop up in the lyrics, and you're like, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Or where does that phrase come from? So it's trying to be interesting. It's trying to be
But you
um,
also quote interviews with band members as well,
I
don't you?
will,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, exactly. I will do. I mean, Fish obviously in the early days was very good at sort of he would stand on stage and introduce the song at great length, and I've got transcripts of him saying what Incubus was about, for example. And you can't do it better than that. I've got H talking about the Estonia disaster, and where that comes from. And sometimes you just have to rely on that H again on This Strange Engine. His explanation of it is absolutely perfect, and he's done it in so many. But one thing I have done actually is pull things from different places over the years. So when the Corona Diaries podcast started, he talked about the choir master, which I don't think I'd ever heard before. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I think anyway, whatever. I think there was bits in that I'd never heard before, and I was able to add into the explanation and really sort of spin it out and go, this is how it relates to his life in all these different ways. So I think that's fine. I don't mind doing that. Um, and equally, sometimes I've included explanations where I'm not 100% certain that they're right, but
Yeah.
because I can't say for it with any degree of certainty that they're wrong, I will put them in and go, there you go. You can have it. You can look at that and go, is that what it means to you? And hopefully it's trying to, it's like if you're doing slouching towards Bethlehem, if I turn around and say, well, that's taken out of a W.B. Yeats poem, um, and we know that that H is into Yeats because he also quoted him on Easter and things like this, then it just sort of adds a little bit of vividity to some of these things. And sort of, when you read that the poem that the slouching towards Bethlehem line is taken from, it sort of adds a whole new dimension to that
Yeah,
poem.
it adds colour to it, doesn't it?
Adds
Yeah.
color to it, exactly. Yeah. The "Oh Daddy, You Will Not Do" line in what's that in on Brave? That's from Sylvia
Lap of
Plath.
luxury, yeah.
Lap of Luxury. That's from Sylvia Plath. And you can see how Sylvia Plath fits into the themes of that song.
I think you're underselling the site, Fraser.
Oh
It's
well,
great. It's great. It's
It is, it is.
we've used it on here and quoted that we've used it. It's a great reference point. It does give you some signposts to maybe do a bit further investigation. And as you say, you can take or leave what's on there. But what's the website called?
oh, it's a terrible name, and I really wish I'd come
That's
up
why
with
I'm asking
something.
you because
Yeah,
I
it's a
can't remember.
it's an absolutely terrible name. Explanations of Song Elements, which is it's just so shit. Uh,
I will do
and
my
I
best to find a link and put it in this episode in the
thank you
in the
very much.
description. But it's a great site. Fraser really has undersold it there.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I hope it. I'm aware that people have enjoyed it because a lot of people do tell me, and it's really gratifying that lots of people have, particularly when it is people from overseas. Have got Brazilians saying, "Actually, you look, this has completely opened this stuff up. I never would have realized all this stuff or whatever." That's amazing, and you think, well, that's exactly what I did it for. And obviously I get something out of it. I find stuff all the time that I didn't know. People will contribute explanations, and I'll go, "Oh God, I hadn't realised that."
It
You
might be
know,
a good point for those people wanting to do slightly better in the quiz to do a bit of research, and couldn't it? You never
well,
know. Just a
yeah.
suggestion.
One of the things that I did relatively recently was I put together a miscellany page, and I pulled together a whole load of lists just because I thought it was nerdy and fun. So here's a list of all the animals that appear in Marillion songs. Here's a list of all the colours that appear in Marillion songs. Here's a list of all the real world people, all the fictional people, all the places, and all these sorts of things. And I've really enjoyed that. The one thing I've never put up on there, and I have got, is the Scrabble scores for every single Marillion song.
Oh my God. That is epic.
I just stuck it into a spreadsheet and it calculates it automatically.
Well,
But
okay. Well, I don't know what to say to that.
I know it's a properly nerdy thing to do.
Yeah, I
I don't
think
know.
you get the prize for the most nerdy. Fraser. We'll end the podcast there. That's yeah. So speaking of conventions,
Yes,
2025 is a convention year. So are
it is.
you planning to go to some of the conventions, and if so, which ones?
Yeah, well, I'm hoping to do well. I'm doing the UK, and I will be doing PZ. I've never been more adventurous than that, which I know is a shame. I'm sure they would be terrific, but it's I've got to do PZ, the last one. And I've been to them all. I've been lucky enough to do that, and so yeah, I'd like to just
Sorry,
do that.
just have to pause for a moment while Craig says what he's going to say.
What?
Go on,
What?
say it. Say
That
it.
you still regret the one that you missed?
I missed one. I missed
I
one.
mean,
I took a stand one year thinking it was all the same. And then the minute it started, I was just reading on Facebook and I wished I was there. So,
yeah, it's a great experience, and I feel very lucky. I mean, actually, I really enjoy being Steph and Stephanie's bitch, and gives me something to do and keeps me occupied, and I sort of, I suppose, I enjoy that sort of thing.
yeah,
I volunteer at Park Run for fun as well. It's obviously in part of my
In your
that's
my
great.
makeup that I
DNA.
Yeah,
enjoy
yeah,
that sort of
yeah.
stuff, I suppose. But yeah, no, I enjoy it.
Have you, change the subject slightly, have you ever seen any of the tribute bands?
I have seen Silmarillion on a number of occasions. I'm trying to think if I've seen any of the others. I think they are the only one I've seen. Well, I've seen a band. I know he's in actual tribute bands, but I've seen a band with Rich Harding and a few of his mates, and they have done Marillion numbers, but I've never seen them do a whole set of it.
Right.
And I think that's it.
Okay. And when did you see Silmarillion recently or quite a while ago?
I haven't seen them since a convention, so that was the last time I saw them. But
All right.
they're always absolutely terrific value, and it's interesting. I never got to see the band live with Fish, and obviously still Marillion are playing much smaller venues than the boys were, Wembley Stadium and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But you do get a sense of what the sort of the punchiness of the music back then. It really is. I mean, Fish in a recent interview, which is controversial for various reasons, but he sort of described, he was talking about the sort of punk prog ness of their early stuff, and it's absolutely true. It really does have a lot of drive to it, that early stuff, and it's very bouncy and everything. And Still Marillion are absolutely fantastic, and I've really enjoyed them. I'm sure the other ones are also terrific, but I haven't
Yeah, the
seen them.
ones that we've seen are very good. It's funny you should mention that. That's in the Mick Wall interview that's come out recently, isn't it? The
It
punk.
is, yes.
When we interviewed Mark Wilkinson a good few months ago, we were talking about it, and I think I used that. I'm not suggesting Fish is taking this from me, but I used that phrase because I really believed they had that punky edge when I first saw them
Mm.
back in 82, 83. It set them apart from everybody else for me.
No, absolutely. I mean, if you think of something like, Market Square Heroes, you could imagine the Stranglers doing that quite
Yeah,
easily, I
definitely,
think.
definitely.
I mean, Andy Rotherham, who is does a lot of guitar teching for the band and was in the Web UK for the longest time. He's there probably is a single other biggest band. Absolutely loves them. I don't think he has any trouble marrying the two.
No, they were
You
the
know,
first band I ever saw live, the
is that
Stranglers,
right?
1979. Yeah, yeah, amazing. Okay, well, I did give you a bit of a heads up of this at the top of the conversation before we recorded, and you said at that point you'd not really given it any thought.
Mm.
If I were to ask you what your favorite Marillion album is, would you be able to tell me?
Or two. You don't have to be
You have a
precious
couple if
on
you want.
one.
One from
Well,
each era.
I'll tell you what. I'll give you. I'll be slightly obvious, and I'll do one from the Fish era, and
Yeah,
I'll do one from the H era. And I think in terms of this is not to say there aren't overall songs that I like better, perhaps from, throughout the catalogue. But I think from the Fish era, for me, it's Clutching. And maybe that's because it was the first one I heard, and maybe it was that Magic Night at Jim's, and maybe it was the right level of drunk and all those other factors that played into it. But for me, that was the high point. I know Misplaced is a magnificent album, but for me, Clutching just slightly edges it. And I'm aware lots of people would feel the other way around, but that would be my view on that. And then for H era, it is Afraid of Sunlight. You mentioned in a break that a slightly uncomplimentary comment that I'd made about Beautiful was used in your, I think the edition that went out today. You said,
yeah. On
and
the day of
I
Yeah,
haven't
the
recording
part
this
two.
episode,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah,
haven't listened to that one yet, obviously, but that aside, I think it's just the most magnificent piece of work as a coherent whole. So I think I would probably say that. But Marble's very, very close. But there's songs throughout the cat, when I think of something like Crow and Nightingale off the last album, that's as good as anything they've done in my book.
yeah, yeah. I can't disagree with any of that, Fraser, at all. Um, and would you have a favorite tour or a favorite time period?
Well, I'm duty bound to mention the going back to something we touched on earlier, which is Pontins, because I met my wife there.
Yeah,
So that obviously was a sort of high point. Um, didn't go there expecting to meet somebody who I'd spend the rest of my life with. So that was rather special. And then I think probably the Marbles period was the one where I sort of just was I was at that point in my life where I didn't have responsibilities, and Kate and I were able to go to loads and loads of gigs, and I mean it shot up from tens of gigs to nearly 100 gigs or something. I mean I genuinely don't know how many gigs I've attended. I definitely don't have all the stubs and all the rest of it, but the Marbles period would have racked up the most significant number of gigs in a single period
It was a
without
very
doubt.
exciting time, though.
Hugely exciting, and they sort of, if I say they milked it, that sort of sounds pejorative. I don't mean that, but they sort of, they rode that wave for quite a while. There was a lot of touring around that
there
period,
was.
and it was a
Yeah.
really great period to follow them around because they were absolutely on fire. And it was great time. So yeah, probably that I would say.
Yeah, the web UK um, day in Aylesbury at the beginning of the Marbles tour was a really good day. We met
Mm,
a lot of people have become firm friends that we'd never met before there.
yeah,
Uh, but that was great to sort of see the setup and have sort of an exclusive warm-up gig. And
yeah.
that's one way in which the web has changed, because we don't tend to get those exclusive things anymore, do we? With exclusive gigs and
No, I mean that's not to say it couldn't happen, and you would have to ask Lucy about that.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think it's probably a reflection of the way they tour as a band as much as anything else.
And
Um,
ticketing nowadays as
and
well, because
ticketing,
I
yeah,
think,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
because there
absolutely.
was a plan for the Roundhouse last year, which I think the ticketing sort of kiboshed that about the subscribers to YouTube would be the only people allowed to
Yeah.
get tickets, and that didn't sort of come to fruition.
Mm, mm.
So there probably isn't a need for it anymore, but
The sort of those sorts of gigs were really important because they fostered relationships between the fans, and obviously, as we know, that's been hugely important for the band, having that close relationship with its fan base. And Lucy has been vital in ensuring that has worked out to the benefit of everybody. So I think it has been a really important thing along the way. But I think those relationships have moved on to social media, perhaps, and so they're sort of curated in a different way than perhaps they were in the past. I guess that's maybe one of the big factors.
Yeah, and
But
things
we all
change
love a
all the
get together,
time.
though.
Oh, we all love a get
Yeah,
together.
yeah. A Web UK barbecue, maybe next year. I don't know.
Mm.
But things are changing all the time. We've now got Marillion Monthly on YouTube.
Yep.
Most months, not recently, but most months.
Yep.
So the band are just constantly finding different ways to communicate with us and
Absolutely.
keep the fan base engaged, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's interesting watching the fan base change and develop as it gets older and everything, and it's interesting seeing things like, the Marcos Marillion Museum coming in and re-engaging all the really early fans, and in a way that perhaps you wouldn't have possibly imagined happening, and yet that's been really interesting. So I think it's time for John Collins to write the next version of
It definitely
Separated
is.
Out, isn't it?
We
We ought
had
to
a
get him out
similar
of retirement.
Yeah, we had a similar conversation recently, didn't we, Craig?
Lots to
We
say.
did.
I think we may actually invite Mr. Collins to come on the podcast, and
He
We'll
is
get
a
our cat
splendid
Phil and
fellow and
chase
would
him
be an
out.
excellent guest.
yes, he would.
Lovely bloke.
He is. Well,
But
look,
it's been
speaking of
20 years,
excellent
hasn't it?
guests,
So
that's
Exactly,
it.
yeah.
Is that
Been a
what?
while. He ought
What's
to get
since
his pen out again.
He ought to. He ought to. Well, speaking of excellent guests, you've been an excellent guest, Fraser. Thank you
Thank
very
you
much
very
for coming
much.
on and talking to us. We really do value your time, and you if you see Fraser at Port Zealand or in Leicester, please come and say hi. He's a very nice guy. He's very sociable, and you may even get a beer. You never know.
I might get a beer, did you say?
Oh, yeah,
yes, you should.
maybe. I think we owe you a beer for today, don't we? But no.
Thank you,
Thanks
chaps.
for coming on, Fraser.
No, it's been a
Great to
pleasure.
see you, mate.
We do appreciate what you do for the web, and please keep doing it.
It's just to be very clear, the web is very much a team effort, and I
Oh,
am
yeah.
but one small cog.
Do you get involved in the packing of the magazines?
Not as often as perhaps I ought to. There are people who are far more diligent and deserve far more praise than I.
Okay, I think we should get them on as well.
You absolutely should. Well, speak to the Joneses.
Okay,
That's what I would say.
We'll have to keep up with them first.
Indeed.
Hey, well, thanks very much for coming on, Fraser. We do appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Okay,
You too,
thank
mate.
you. And thank you for listening, guys and girls. It's good night from me.
And it's good night from him.
Take care.
And stay alive. Hey.
Thanks for listening to Planet Marzipan Podcast. Please like and subscribe from whichever platform you get your podcasts from. You can contact us at planetmarzipanpodcast@gmail.com and check out marillion.com, fishmusic.scot or fishmusic.eu for all the good stuff.